Well, it's clear that community is important to you. How does the city of Pittsburgh inform your poetry?
Yeah, Pittsburgh is in every poem because I was born in the city, and I, have these memories of how the city has evolved, and just about every sidewalk I might be on has some kind of memory for me or some kind of importance. City of Asylum is right next to the Garden Theater. I remember the Garden Theater from childhood. My childhood church, Metropolitan Baptist, is on the same street as City of Asylum. So I have all those memories. And also, I think Pittsburgh is such a literary city. There's so many writers here,
Yes.
so many poets here, at the universities, and so many readings. We have the Mad Women, for example. We have the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics. We've got the Hemingway series. I
Right.
don't know if you've
I mean,
ever
yeah, there's
gone,
the
but
Pitt Poetry series as
the,
well.
yeah.
It goes on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And Autumn House.
Yes.
So Ada Limon, our
Yes.
poet laureate, her
I love
first
her.
book was published by Autumn House Press.
I did not know
Yes,
that. Wow.
yes. And she also has a Kentucky connection,
Yeah.
and
Yes, she does.
is
She's
interested in horses.
very inspired by like the natural world and nature. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So interesting. Well, I mean, why is poetry so important for Pittsburgh, for a city like Pittsburgh?
That is a good question. And I think that I don't know, people joke and say there's something in the water. But I think that somehow in Pittsburgh, we never lost our realness because of our being rooted in industry and in work.
Yes.
And even though, we've moved into these areas of technology and, we've lost that kind of steel mill grittiness, that's still our heritage. And I think that's why. And I think that's why jazz, and music has been so important for the city that we're really, it's really our history. It's really our legacy here.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. Would you read Homewood for us?
Oh, yeah, sure. So this is called Homewood Poem, and it's a poem based on my childhood. And this house in Homewood that's on Apple Street, it's a Queen Anne house.
Okay.
And it was where the Negro National Opera House was created in 1942.
Wow.
So it's got this history,
History.
and people are trying to restore it right now to make it a community center
Oh, wow.
for music.
Wow.
Homewood Poem. Stranahan, steepest hill in Homewood, pulls my primary school bones like iron filings across an Etch-a-Sketch. From Belmar at the top to flat Apple Street, running across its base near 7101 Mystery Manor. Bought by Woogie Harris, the gangster banker in the 30s. In rabbit fur maxi coats, chinchilla draped shoulders, jewel studded T straps and wingtips, people stepped from Cadillacs, Mercedes, Bentleys, and Triumphs outside the 17-room Queen Anne at any time of day and night, taking whiskey, cigars, poker, and jazz up through the winding staircase and stained glass windows to the turreted ballroom. 71 Apple Street, Mary Cardwell Dawson's National Negro Opera Company in 1941. Mary Cardwell Dawson, teacher to Ahmad Jamal, had to leave Pittsburgh for school, had to leave Pittsburgh to pursue opera, had. Roberto Clemente, they called him uppity, stayed here when even a famous brown face couldn't guess downtown. Homewood, your lore hides in archives. The Pittsburgh Courier, Teenie Harris's negatives, hides in plain sight. Apple Street mansion, now mountain of decay behind broken iron gates, historic marker obscured in weeds. Fading even as I crawl up Leamington Avenue, 9 years old, in compulsory leggings and snow boots. And back down, a breeze kissing the backs of my knock knees, skipping in bobby socks and Buster Brown brogans, mid-June, last day of school, to fourth grade music in homeroom, to Mrs. Goldsmith. She stands in front, reads the Old Testament, a wart on her middle finger like a dimpled thimble. She'd had more in childhood, she wants us to know, had, than we will in a lifetime. But she didn't have it easy, she says. And besides, those black Muslims shouldn't be allowed to exist.
I loved that one. I loved the descriptions of, the black excellence that existed at that house with, jazz and cigars and fancy cars. And I just, observing others, I think, is something that finds its way into your poetry too. And, observing places. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Well, I think that there is a lot of hidden history, and especially in terms of the black middle classes or the black upper classes, that's a history that doesn't get told a lot. But in terms of my observations, I think there's something that poets just do. I think that we do watch and listen and remember. And my mother is always saying to me, how do you remember this, right? But we do. And that's why, in a way, it's a kind of danger with writers, right, in families, because we don't forget. And you could read it or see it somewhere where you may not want. But that's just a part of, I think, noticing is so important to writing. And I think that's what comes very naturally for us.
Yeah, that's so true. And I just love the Pittsburgh Courier, Teenie Harris's negatives, hides in plain sight. And that's just what you're saying. Like, it's right there. And I feel like poetry is a tool to reveal a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think of poetry as an experience. It's not just a luxury, as Audre Lorde said. Poetry is not a luxury. It really takes you other places. So I was mentioning Joy Priest, and one of her poems I read is called Ghost Writer. And I didn't know anything about the ghost writer experience on the West Coast, where people get out of their cars as they're moving and kind of dance around their cars. And there is also a documentary about it. So a lot of poets have these notes at the end of the collection, and you can go and look. And so there's so much to be learned from poems, because they do take us into experiences. So it's not, so literature is a part of education. It's not something that's separate or fluff. It also takes you into knowledge and different kinds of knowledge.
Yeah, and you can learn things in just a way that you wouldn't otherwise, or things you wouldn't get the opportunity to learn without reading it from a poem. And it might not stick with you or have the impact it would if it weren't a poem.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right, and I think that's a part of the magic of poetry and other literatures and art, that it is emotional.
Yes.
We are engaged with it.
And that's what I want to talk about. I mean, earlier we were saying how, or you were saying, you're not really sure, or we're not really sure where poetry comes from. I think that, poetry is a human instinct. Like, it's a need that we have within us to read poems and write poems. And whether you act on that need or not is what makes you a poet or not. But it exists in all humans.
I think you're so right. And I think that the really wise people have said, poets have said, that poetry is for everyone,
Yeah.
that we are all poets and that we need poetry.
Yes.
It's a way of responding and making sense of our experiences. And that's why I think we have to be concerned in education that we're making sure that children know that.
Yes.
That, yes, you're right. This is a natural way for
Yes.
you to make
It's
sense
not
of
a chore
experience.
to have to write.
Right.
A gift, and it's a need.
Yes, it's not just in a class,
Yes.
but this is something that you do because you're human, because you're alive.
Yeah.
You are in your environment.